Ronaldo and the Loaf's music is for people that have ears.
When I discovered Ronaldo and the Loaf, it was a real different thing for me. It kind of broadened my opinion of what could exist or what was possible.
When I want to tell somebody what's it like listening to Ronaldo and the Loaf, it's like being a baby and hearing things for the very first time as an adult.
There's a lot of humour there. I've always found there's things that they do that make me chuckle.
They're just so clever.
You know, if you're a Streisand fan, you might not like Ronaldo and the Loaf, but who knows? I mean, I don't know. It's different.
I have no problem with weird as a description, but a lot of times weird is a way of dismissing something.
I think the word eccentric sort of describes it at best. You know, it's I couldn't label it with a musical genre. I don't think it sounds like anything else.
There was no limit to anything. It's like whatever they wanted to do, they did it, and it was like as far as the creativity, it was just like everything and anything goes.
I don't want to put it in a category that it's this kind of music. To me, it's music.
The media is so inundated with so much at this point, they want things to be pre-digested for them. And the way you pre-digest it is you put it in a category. You know, the more original something is, the less you can compare it to. The less you can compare it to, the less people are going to take the time to figure out what it is and think about it and process it on their own.
Once you get to listening to them a lot, it just becomes like, this is the catchiest song. Why doesn't everybody love this?
I knew nothing about them, and I didn't know who made the music or anything about their personalities. And I'll be honest, I wondered how people could make such strange music.
I thought, boy, these guys are great, and they're weird, and they're embracing it, and they know it, and that's great.
The people that would make that kind of music and the people that would have to be, you know, genius enough, I guess, to make that kind of music are probably not people that are out socializing and partying, and they're in their rooms doing that stuff. That's why that stuff is so great.
It was really extraordinary what they were doing, and then just flabbergasted that it was coming from Portsmouth. They were just this enigma in the city.
No one in my family was musical. I think when I was about 10 or 11 years old, one Christmas I was given a plastic guitar. That kicked it off, really.
Mind me asking? My dad used to work in Portsmouth Dockyard, and one day he came back with 2 LPs. First Tyrannosaurus Rex album, My People Were Fair. The other was Lumpy Gravy by the Mothers of Invention. I preferred the Tyrannosaurus Rex album.
Tyrannosaurus Rex's music was like nothing I'd heard before. The singing was very unusual. In fact, you needed a lyric sheet to understand what Mark Bolan was singing. He had a very distinctive style.
I've known Dave since 1969 or 1970, so that would be, well, do the math. Can you do the math for me?
I've known Brian for almost 50 years now. We met at school in the sixth form in the art room.
I was doing a drawing based on a Tyrannosaurus Rex song, and I think Dave was doing a drawing based on a Tyrannosaurus Rex album cover or something. And so obviously we spotted this and got chatting.
Almost immediately we started playing things together.
We asked our music teacher at school, could you give us some classes to play the guitar?
We were both interested in folk music at the time.
I bought a book of folk blues songs and gave it to the music teacher. Now, he knew how to play all the chords, but He had absolutely no idea what the song sounded like. So he was playing the blues as though it was an old English folk song, which didn't really help us much. And so we decided just to sort of, well, forget that. We said we'll go off on our own path, which is what we did.
In a flash he was gone, and the sun it again shone, and Zeus of light nevermore broke the silence of Woodlaw.
My mum had actually won in a competition, one of the first cassette recorders, and she gave it to me, and we'd set that up with a mic and record our songs.
Call everybody on top of Zeus Harp Music. Yes.
Me on drums.
Yeah, Brian on drums.
We always had the habit of recording pretty much everything we did. So there are cassettes that exist going back to 1970, going twang, twang, twang in an extremely naive way and singing.
Dance you devil tail of green, tall and witching in flight, wishing for the bells of winter star.
We got more dexterous at what we were doing.
I suppose we've been playing together maybe a year, and the opportunity came to perform at a local youth club. We did 3 performances at this youth club, which gradually got stranger.
Each time we were getting more excited about what we were doing and experimenting, the less the people liked it.
I think my parents were just kind of bemused, really.
My parents never really listened, never really heard it, apart from through the wall or the door when I was recording.
Other friends, I don't think it was their kind of thing, really.
Oh, well, that's what you do. Yes, oh, you're our friend. Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting's a really good word to actually, because it means nothing.
Well, I mean, there was a period when we didn't play an awful lot. When Brian was studying architecture, I was studying zoology.
In the intervening period, we've been listening to different musics. I'd been listening to folk and world musics.
Around that time, I discovered Henry Cow. That was a bit of a revelation for me, that rock music could encompass such a wide spectrum, you know, from completely free to completely structured.
And when we got back together afterwards, we just got interested just making sounds.
That's when things started to kind of morph into much stranger stuff.
Here it is. Construction of dubious benevolence. Moving south of lambton proportion. Just what you needed.
I know it was organic, but I don't understand how I know they use tape loops, but I still don't really understand how they got their sound.
A different theatre.
I wouldn't say that I played any instrument well, really.
Basically, we just started preparing guitar and playing guitars in different ways.
I saw the guitar then as a device for making sound with, rather than as an instrument as such.
We would grab whatever and I don't know if I'd use the word abuse the instruments, but think laterally with them.
We liked the sound of synthesizers, we couldn't afford one, so we tried to make the sounds like synthesizers, using guitars, tape effects and so on, speeding things up, slowing them down, that kind of thing, running them backwards.
If you went in there would be all these various instruments, but not, state-of-the-art instruments. They had a couple of tape recorders, I seem to remember, some guitars and some combs and some
Remember rulers that used to go bang and things like that, and they'd record them and play them backwards and all this sort of stuff. We developed our sort of sound vocabulary in that period just by improvising.
We were always trying to push what the equipment was supposed to do. And we'd think of, well, what if you did this? It's not really designed to do that, but if we took the output of this and put it into there and then fed it back round, what would that do?
I don't actually ever feel that we ever deliberately wanted to be weird or do weird. What people called weird is the stuff that actually gave us the excitement to do what we do. We just didn't want to do the boring stuff. I think we would see ourselves more as surrealists and Dadaists, if you like, than anything. And so we weren't scared by these odd things that we were coming up with. We're very, very open to whatever happened.
It can happen when you're walking.
Well, all their music was produced out of Dave's bedroom, really. I used to live just round the corner from Dave. I'd come round with guitar and whatever, and trundling actually a tape recorder. Dave was getting a lot more into the idea of making tape loops.
Just record some sounds onto a length of tape.
Certainly for making the loops, you would have to be extremely dexterous, like a surgeon, cutting tape up with a scalpel.
Find where the sound started, cut them out, and then splice them all together.
Literally, we wouldn't say anything. We'd just sit down with instruments and just start playing along to it, improvising.
We work Saturday afternoon, have a break for tea, and then we work on into the evening till maybe 9 o'clock at the latest, then we'd adjourn to the pub.
It's like you were playing in a football team, you know, you're sort of like, oh yeah, well, we do training on a Tuesday and you're going to play on Saturday. You know, it became a habit and we just kept to it.
You're going to mug me? Am I going to mug you?
Is that gorgeous or what, eh?
And I believe I can run a decent marathon.
Thank you very much.
Download Veely now.
Eventually, there was one particular Thursday afternoon where these improvisations almost created a structure, a bit like a song.
So we recorded it, and then we did some overdubs.
We then sent a tape off to an independent record label called Raw Records in Cambridge, and we got a very positive response.
That record deal fell through, but someone had found the music interesting enough to consider that it was worth putting out as a record.
It wasn't like, oh, hey, we want to make this our career. It was just like, oh, well, we've got this record, you know, it would be pretty neat if we could get it released somehow. And so we went to meet a couple of A&R people. We went to Virgin and Rough Trade. Well, you know, you've got some really interesting ideas and sounds going on here.
But you need to kind of condense them more. You need to make each piece more interesting.
Collide them together and go and buy yourself a decent tape recorder.
This was when the idea of producing a do-it-yourself cassette came about.
And so we went and got the 4-track tape recorder and then started recording the songs which became Struve and Sneff and decided to call ourselves Ronaldo and the Loaf.
See them fucking slowly in your fridge, Dominator, regulator. I can see them made of ice, made of ice, made of ice, made of ice. And around us, looking for us, looking to us, looking orders, looking harder. Can you see them made of ice, made of ice, made of ice, made of ice?
We used to go out on a Friday night for what we called dice nights. which were based on a book called The Dice Man, in which the main character made all his decisions on the roll of a dice. We would decide where we went, what we wore, and what we would do when we got wherever we were going. We'd do it all on the roll of a dice.
Each of the people that went on the dice evenings had to have a dice name.
Someone had christened Brian Ronaldo.
Neither of us actually know why I got that name at all.
And I'd been christened Ted the Loaf.
Ted, because at the time he had a big bushy beard, which made him look a little bit like a teddy bear, apparently.
The loaf bit is Cockney rhyming slang. The Cockney rhyming slang, loaf of bread, head. So someone who can use their loaf is considered to be intelligent, brainy, or whatever. While we were kicking around ideas for a name, one of us said, well, why not Ronaldo and the Loaf? And we decided, yeah, well, why not? And that kind of stuck.
We were under no illusions about what we were doing. I mean, we weren't trying to be a commercial or successful band or anything.
The idea of making a career out of music never entered our heads at the time.
And we were two like-minded people who were, almost indulging ourselves in this creation of, I suppose, a form of art, if you like.
Bathroom mirror's upside down, ceiling has a crack. Tap washer needs replacing, toothpaste lost its cap. Deodorant spray is empty, the bath has lost its plug. I try different shampoo, but every time I shake my head it stops.
I mean, it's quite strange. We did the vast majority of our most creative work in a complete bubble. We were in a bubble of just us and very few select friends, the Dice friends, of course. As more people got to hear the stuff, we realised that, actually, what we have been making and are making now does have some appeal outside of our own bubble.
Ralph Records was the coolest label ever, period.
Ralph originally was started by the Residents.
It was an in-house record label that the Residents set up in order to put out their own records because no one else wanted to.
The Residents had started making these records and they didn't really have a concept of selling. They're not really the business people. They just want to do the art and then move to the next project.
I first heard of the Residents, I think probably Dave introduced me to them.
From what we could tell from the albums we were listening to, they weren't super competent musicians, but they didn't let that stand in their way of producing interesting music.
The Residents couldn't play. They couldn't play worth a shit. But they always felt like they could layer things on top of each other, one track after another, and create something that then had value and interest.
Pretty much music was dominated by people who could play. And that makes logical sense, but it also leaves an area of unexplored sound possibilities for people who can't play.
What the Residents did for us was give us the confidence to know that in the world there was a band making proper albums that were odd sounding, interesting sounding, exciting to us. And that gave us the fuel, if you like, to really move us forward.
The Residents were actually doing fairly well in terms of finances, record sales at that point. When Eskimo, for instance, came out, we drop shipped from the factory 10,000 records, like that, and then another 10,000 went fairly quickly. We thought, well, okay, we will sign more commercial groups, and then ultimately that will then become the financial backing that allows the Residents to maintain their position as the Residents.
Now, Ralph was not just any record label, certainly not like the big ones at all. There's like a bunch of really, hugely creative people.
I don't know, 5, 6 people
who just happened to make records and do the mail order.
Helping with the mail order, doing whatever needed to be done there.
You know, cleaning the cat box.
Everybody in the building was just so sharp and so funny.
It was kind of a playpen for adults.
Ralph Records was a family. You know, everybody in it was part of this family.
We all did very much care for one another as humans. And I think that's what really made it work, too.
We made Struve and Sneff, the tape, in September 1979. It so happened that I was due to go on a fly drive holiday with some friends to the west coast of America at the end of September.
He always said, well, if I get chance, I want to go to 444 Grove Street, which is where the residents were based at the time.
So I rang them up and they said, yeah, sure, come along. Apparently I was allowed to get in because I had a British accent and I'd actually come all the way over to San Francisco, etc., etc. And I said, this is our tape we just done. I would like to give a copy to Ralph Records. The guy said, oh, well, yeah, I'll listen to a little bit now. So he went off into a glass-fronted booth at the back of the space and sat there, and I think he must have probably listened to, say, 3 tracks, something like that.
Literally, Ralph Records would receive hundreds of demo cassettes. You know, they came in on a daily basis. And the reality was that there were too many of them to ever listen to. But for whatever reason, and at this point I really don't know what that reason was, somehow I was attracted to Ronaldo and the Loaf's cassette.
And he said, this is excellent. And I whoa, oh, thank you. He said, have you got any more material? And I said, well, I'll send you some more stuff, sure.
It was called to my attention by our A&R guy at Ralph, Hardy Fox. He said, hey man, come listen to this. And I did, and it hit me right away.
I was very taken by it.
He put it on for me, and I'm there, wow, that's very interesting.
They were extremely original, did not play by the rules, and did very interesting and entertaining stuff.
I think it was in June 1980, that a letter just arrived completely out of the blue saying, look, you know, we've really been enjoying your music. It's not that commercial, but we'd really like to put an album out by you. And that floored us completely.
It was weird because we used to have these fantasies about things that might happen. And one of the fantasies was taking the tape to Ralph Records. They liked it, and we got signed to the label. Not something we ever thought would happen.
It was the label in the world that perhaps we would ever dream of recording for.
For it to actually happen was just a bit stunning, really.
It was a huge stroke of luck.
It must have been a great leap of faith, as making any decision in a tiny little record company is. But that just spoke to the artistry and the people who Brian and Dave were.
When they signed us, they were in the they were starting to sign other acts. They were kind of expanding as a label then.
Because we were starting to sell the residents so successfully, it only made sense that we could sell other people, which was completely wrong, but that was the idea.
There were maybe 10 or 12 different artists.
You know, including like Art Bears and Fred Frith and Yellow and Snakefinger MX-80, Tuxedo Moon, Ronaldo and the Loaf.
The hope was that these people would sell in numbers exceeding the residents and consequently bring in enough money to keep the label going and keep the residents doing their own eccentric, weird stuff. There was greater hope or expectation towards other groups like MX-80 or Tuxedo Moon or Snakefinger, who were, ostensibly more commercial.
They did, however, have commercial appeal with respect to the Ralph Records target audience. That is one of very esoteric taste.
We were sat with Jay Clem when we were actually on the, signing the contract and things like that. And the question came up about, well, are you going to want us to make certain kinds of music for you? And he said, well, no, you do what you feel.
The expectation of our artists were to keep doing the same creative things that called them to our attention in the first place.
Do what you do, and we'll try to exploit it the best we can.
We had a complete free hand to record whatever we wanted, as long as it wasn't 40 minutes of dog farts.
48 minutes of what?
Did I say something about dog farts?
The phrase he used was like, as long as it wasn't 40 minutes of dog farts on a record, we'll be quite happy.
Huh. Okay. Well.
Okay, that would exactly be a parameter that Jay Clem would set.
If Brian and Dave would have submitted 40 minutes of dog farts, I assume it would have been done in a creative and humorous manner, and therefore would have been acceptable.
So there was no pressure. The stuff that obviously we'd been sending them became with the tracks for Larvae, and the thing was put together over the next few months.
If I ever see you gazing at the dial, if I remember you made inquiries, why was I you? You're a number boy, trying to win the name. Did you get these from a face?
I think when Songs for Swing Larvae came out, we were very excited about it. The fact that it was a proper release as opposed to a homegrown do-it-yourself cassette.
What Ralph did, they sent us updates of what was going on, like quite a lot of college playlists where they highlighted, oh, Larvae is on the playlist here, and we'd get really excited, like, ooh, wow.
The reviews were quite mixed. They weren't, well, some of them were bad. I think on the whole, the music press, it was kind of, they didn't go overboard about it, but on the other hand, they weren't totally disparaging either.
I think the UK press couldn't get over that we weren't residents imitators.
If you take most of pop music, you can put it in a lump like this, and then you have the Residents over here, and you have Ronaldo and the Loaf over here. They're both kind of equidistant from, the mass of pop music as a whole.
I first heard Ronaldo and the Loaf because I was looking through a record bin and there was just a section of Ralph records.
I decided to check out all the other groups on Ralph Records because the Residents were great and I wanted to find out some more interesting music.
The sleeves of their records had the other bands on the label. So I just figured if they're on Ralph, I'll check it out.
You discovered music in such, prehistoric ways back then. Somebody handing you something.
Back then you didn't have the internet. You weren't connected to things. And I was in a small town in central New York.
Me and my brother would religiously watch a show called Night Flight. It was like a video musical program, like a half hour long or whatever.
It was not a mainstream show. There was no announcer.
There was no genre. It was like anything goes.
And you didn't know what they'd be playing. So there was that excitement involved. You never knew what was going to be on there when you turned it on.
So this particular night we tuned in and they happened to put in the Ronaldo and the Loaf Songs for Swing and Larvae video. And we were just completely blown away. It was like nothing we've ever heard or seen before. It was so outrageous.
I was working at Ralph Records, pumping out rock videos, which we didn't know whether they were rock videos at the time because we didn't know what rock videos were. They were just short music films.
That's the kind of record company it was, you know. Have to have an in-house filmmaker.
I suppose it sort of shocked us in a way. It was a sort of shock tempered by the fact that it was also pretty cool. The whole film was brilliantly put together, and visually was great.
It's still one of my favorite videos for anyone.
It's just brilliant.
Modestly speaking, I think it's the best music video ever made. But, you know, I'm prejudiced.
All that red.
It's just red liquid. It's not blood. It's just red liquid.
When I'm washing dishes in the sink, I always think of the woman pouring the colored liquid back and forth into the cups. That occurs to me almost every single time for I don't know how many years.
Look at the earth.
So we have this little kid abducted, brought away and stuff, and then all these images of fish heads being blended up and things like that, and you know, it's just Graham's vision. Graham sort of like he looks a little outside the box.
We had not a great deal to do with it, really.
We had a few ideas, like things like having some things running backwards. But apart from that, it was Graham Whiffler.
First of all, I had the Ken Parnell story. That was the backbone to the whole thing.
The kidnap thing, which was nothing we would have ever thought about.
Well, it was based on a true story, yeah.
There was this crime splattered across the front page of the Chronicle, and it was about this guy named Ken Parnell who had kidnapped a little boy and taken him home. That was my story. I walked into the business affairs office at Ralph Records. I slapped a newspaper down. I go, this is the video. And then the rest of it is just imagery that's kind of like dream imagery that I just made up as I went along. This is the cat from the Ronaldo and Loaf video. Was originally an abandoned fur coat in my neighbor's backyard, and I saw the coat back there, and I go, oh, I could make a cat with that. I got another one for you, though. That's a thrift store find. I go all around the world, and people come up to me, and they tell me I gave them nightmares as a kid.
When I first saw that video, I want to say I was about 14, and I was very disturbed.
Watching those Ralph videos had a real psychological impact on a lot of young minds.
You know, it was very shocking for people, but a lot of people loved it. And once again, another thing ahead of itself.
We would show them at nightclubs, we'd show them on college campuses, we'd show them anywhere we could. I mean, we were desperate to show them at film festivals.
It got shown at a couple of festivals before people thought, oh, hold on, this is really not the kind of thing you can show on mainstream telly or anything. And then it sort of became a cult thing.
And then when MTV came along, we were one of the, I know, a small, stupid record label, but we had a can of film sitting there, and it was just like, well, maybe some of this stuff could get put on this new TV thing. I don't know how many times it was shown, but I know I seen it at least once on MTV.
A lot of people have seen it.
That video was one of the things that really, really drove home the idea that, yeah, this band was definitely like a Ralph band.
After I did Ronaldo, I think that was the last one I did for Ralph Records. Their economics situation was rapidly changing, and they just didn't have the money for videos.
At that time, that was kind of a low point for Ralph Records. The Residents did their Mole Show tour, which was a complete and total disaster.
Lights out, senses sleep. Woo! Deep, deep, deep. Indulging in REM. cottage livery.
It was a very hard time financially. I mean, it came very close to just disappearing at that point.
Not only did it mean that we were going to have to completely restructure.
There was a big change in turnover.
It was very hard to get paid by people and start collecting money.
But it also meant we had to move from 444 Grove Street, which was just awful.
You know, residents were self-recorded, self-produced for all practical purposes. You know, my partner Hardy was the engineer and kind of co-producer with the residents. But for anybody else, we would have to hire a studio for them to go into and make an album. Whatever the cost of that was, it would start out that much in the hole. Ronaldo and the Loaf were not in the same category. They were more like the residents in that, you know, they were self-produced.
His eyes are glazed, his cheeks are thin. He's not been taking food in. It's a shadow of his former self.
I was just trying to figure out how to do as inexpensive a cover as I could. So it was basically a black and white drawing that I did, and then a two-color print job because that was cheap.
Arabic yodeling was a difficult birth.
What people refer to as the difficult second album.
Well, usually it's the difficult second album because will it sell as many as the first one, and will the band succeed in the future? It wasn't like that. It was the difficult creative aspect of the second album for us.
Roughage, oh yes.
Although it was kind of the third release we'd done because of Struve and Sneff, the first two were recorded we didn't know that they were going to be made public.
For the first time, we had the knowledge that whatever we were coming out with would likely be released. And that was something we'd never had to deal with before, ever.
So I think we became a bit more self-critical, I guess, about everything we did. Was it good enough?
We were seeking perfection to supersede what Larvae did, and basically we just wouldn't be satisfied with anything.
The whole process was becoming much more protracted.
It did change our working relationship in that we felt that we had to separate and explore musical ideas individually and then bring them together and surprise each other. Late February 1981, Dave and I went to San Francisco to visit.
They were here in San Francisco for a good 2 to 3 weeks.
And during that time, the residents expressed an interest in seeing what would happen if they and Ronaldo and the Loaf actually were in a studio at the same time.
Somebody, once again, I don't know who at this point, made that suggestion, you know, threw it out into the ozone to see if it would float or fly or whatever, and it just kind of took on its own life.
It was just another one of those things that was just a natural progression.
I think that the residents really, I know they loved Brian and David's music. You know, it was just like, I mean, we played it all the time. You know, I mean, there would be Led Zeppelin playing too, but we would hear Ronaldo and the Loaf, all that. We would play that tape to death.
Wow. Okay. But anyway, we eventually devised this idea of doing an album in 4 days. Day 1 being just like this huge jam session. Day 2 doing overdubs, you know, day 3 some vocals, and then all that sort of thing. Of course, it was completely unfeasible. We did do the long jam session, and we did do quality control sifting of that jam session. And then that was it. It was just shelved and forgotten.
What? What? You say?
In '83, Dave and I went to see the Mole Show, and afterwards we met backstage with the residents and we were chatting, and they floated the idea of just, hey, do you think we could actually perhaps finish that project? And said, okay. When they wanted to do it, Dave wasn't available to be able to do that. And so I went to San Francisco. Dave sent a box full of really cool loop tapes. The jam session had been transferred to a 16-track, and we used those as templates for potential songs. And so the songs happened in the studio.
He laughed a lot, and this is what he said. Truth comes out of fiction, love comes out of friction. Purity is interesting, but so is superstition.
For me, it's almost, is it a dream? I don't know. It's, I can remember significant parts of it, and there is photographic evidence of that time of the recording. But it was like to spend time in the studio with the residents for like 3 weeks. It was just amazing.
But they did learn things from the residents too, so, and I think the residents learned things from them too.
I smiled at the roses and started to think of beauty that lay in this logical link.
I think the response was quite positive.
Certainly for us, it had the impact of the largest royalty we ever got.
And that gave us enough money to be able to afford to buy an 8-track tape recorder and a proper mixing desk.
Some outboard equipment, one of the first digital reverbs.
What we didn't realize was how good a job the residents and us were doing at creating an intriguing image. And a lot of times I think it was people that were so drawn into the world of the residents by that image that was responsible for the sales.
The anonymity, the way they present themselves in public, that kind of generates more interest than 2 part-time British guys.
I trained as an architect, went into practice straight from college and stayed in self-employed in practice in a partnership for many years, something like 40 years.
For most of my working life, I worked in the National Health Service as a biomedical scientist in pathology. We get all the tissue specimens from operations, post-mortems, biopsies from clinics and so on, and we make the slides that the consultant pathologist then uses to make their diagnosis.
In that latter period, both our personal lives were changing.
I think probably Brian and I viewed our day jobs in slightly different ways. I mean, Brian, being his career as an architect, I think he saw it very much as a career. I was certainly committed to the job. I felt that it was a worthy thing to do. But it was also something that when I went home at the end of the day, I could forget about it. I always saw working as a means to an end, really. It was a means that provided money for living. And I also had the free time to pursue the music.
There were stresses. Post-Arabic Yodelling, we did a compilation album, Ollie Ollie Rock Cod, which was, I think, instigated from the Titan and Limbo recognition, if you like. We got taken a bit more seriously. But since we very much are hands-on people with our projects, we didn't just say, oh, here's the music, you go off and you just do the cover and you just do whatever. We just didn't think like that. And so we spent time working on the cover with some artistic friends and that, and it just took time up. And when you're doing that, you're not doing music. And so there was a gap. There's a certain amount of energy that you have, and when you're trying to juggle that with whatever it is you're doing for your job, and you haven't always got the energy to feel perky on a Saturday and, hey, let's do this.
The fact that we were recording on 8-track, there was, a lot more tracks to fill up.
And then by the time we'd actually got the audio done, which was probably 86, then it came to the cover. And a lot of time was spent on the cover.
Here in the words can you hear? Here in the words can you hear? Here in the words can you hear?
While all this was going on and Elbow wasn't finished, we weren't really thinking or doing any other music. And I know it exhausted us. The whole thing just exhausted us. And that is the point, I think, where we thought, this is like hard work, isn't it?
I don't know, we just run out of steam, I think.
It's not like something I really recognised at the time, but maybe it was happening, a little earlier. I don't know.
It didn't seem like quite so much fun.
Our friendship was very much born out of the music, of course, and that was what glued us together. Although we were like friends, and Dave was the best man at my wedding and things like that. But, apart from meeting up and doing our music, we didn't used to meet up and do other things.
I worked with a million bands through my life, and it's just, everything is chemistry, and it's the chemistry of this and this that makes this.
It's not uncommon for bands to break up. It's keeping those egos and the personalities, copacetic is not an easy thing to do.
As I saw it, they had a bond through their crusty bachelorness. Whatever balance existed in their relationship, and I felt like there was a very strong creative balance that existed early on, but that balance then got upset with Brian having things more important in his life that he had to deal with.
I raised 2 daughters, continued the practice, working, plate spinning, keeping things going.
Brian will have his own take on it, but from my point of view, it was focusing on other things, a lot of which was discovering who I am, getting married, moving to a whole new location. It's just life happening, really. That's how I'd. That's all any of it is. It's just life happening.
We just decided to take these 2 different roads, and those roads were such that they were somewhat far apart, and then we lost sight of each other.
Probably by the time we stopped playing, we'd been working together for about 17 years.
I don't know if I was surprised as much as I was disappointed.
They were just silent, you didn't really know why things happened because there was no internet and there was no magazines that covered artists like them. They just happened to stop making music, and at the time you just accepted it.
I had heard some painful rumor that that David was not only disavowing Ronaldo and the Loaf, but sort of disavowing music. So I thought, well, there goes that.
Brian carried on making music. I didn't. I mean, there was other stuff going on in my life at that time, which I'm not going to go into. Yeah, I just didn't. That urge to create just kind of gone, really.
Musically, I floundered when Dave wasn't around because I've been so used to us bouncing things off each other. I needed a sounding board.
He would tell me, you know, he's working and this and that, and he hasn't had a lot of time for music, but he does have his studio upstairs.
I did find that there was a possible release in that by getting into using a computer. And so in the very early days, like 1990, 91 or whatever, I started creating stuff in MIDI on a computer. Although the amount of work I did was minimal compared to before, and I found it virtually impossible to make decisions. And so things hardly ever got completed.
In the things I say and the things I do.
He sort of fell off the scene. There were no releases coming out saying, write to Ronaldo at this address. He was just a non-entity. The only thing that existed was, you know, Ralph Records, and at that point, Ralph Records didn't exist anymore.
We really were no longer, we were interested in putting our energy and impetus behind the residents, not behind other artists. But Tom and Sheena maintained that interest.
Tom Timoney started sort of a splinter kind of a company.
But about 1988, we sort of created Tectones.
We were kind of expanding in different musics.
We tried to do things that were really not oriented to, let's say, the Ralph clientele.
I actually did correspondence with Tectones, and then I didn't get any like letter back or anything like that. I just got a catalog.
I heard this band Ronaldo and the Loaf. I want their CDs. Do you have them? And of course we had them. We had albums, we had CDs, we had everything.
It was like a nuclear bomb went over my head because it had all these things that I didn't even know about. Like, I knew that Ronaldo video, but I didn't know their albums. I didn't know anything about them.
I wound up getting the gig to repackage some of the Ronaldo and the Loaf stuff for CD. And I asked if I could do a piece of art for it, like a 2-page spread. I was just trying to insinuate myself in there somewhere into a record that had already been established. I remember the way I pitched it, it's just 2 more panels, it won't cost too much. And I just dug through the lyrics, word like camel or whatever. And I was like, oh, I can draw that. So I tried to make everything in it part of the world that they were trying to create. I was trying to illustrate their world by putting their elements in it.
The albums had been reissued on CD by Tectones in the early 90s, but there was no sort of retail presence, shall we say, of Ronaldo and the Loaf. Our stuff was very difficult to get hold of.
Nobody knew who they were. I had friends, and I said, have you ever heard of Ronaldo and the Loaf? And they said, you're making that up.
In those days, in the late 80s, it was very difficult to find out about bands that weren't current, if you like, or bands that weren't on TV or played on the radio.
I first heard about Ronaldo and the Loaf as this kind of like almost cultish thing back in the mid-1990s.
It was really hard to get their albums back then.
Anything that was at the record store was major label stuff.
And it wasn't until some years later, almost, sort of in the last 10, 15 years, when I met Brian, he was able to furnish me with all of the material that you couldn't get hold of for all those years ago.
I was always never lost my pride in Ronaldo and the Loaf. I always had a love for that music and what we did.
I reached out to Brian and I just said, hi, I'm a fan. And I told him how much their music meant to me. And I couldn't believe he responded.
If people were interested, I would talk to them about it. If people, I would deal with people who were trying to find something out about Ronaldo and the Loaf, the website that was originally set up by Ian McGrath.
I realized that there was no Ronaldo and the Loaf website that I could find, and I said, well, why don't I make one?
When I first got a computer and first got internet access, just out of interest, I put Ronaldo and the Loaf in the search engine. And I was surprised to find that there were actually a couple of websites devoted to Ronaldo and the Loaf. I was surprised that that there was any interest at all, really. It's something that I find quite helpful that when you're looking back on a situation or an experience in your life, to kind of write it down. And it's surprising things that come out, things that you remember, insights you get about the whole process that can be instructive. I was going to say cathartic, but cathartic's perhaps too dramatic a word for it.
I had no means of actually contacting Dave at all. I didn't know where he was. I had no idea.
Dave emailed me, and he didn't say, I'm Dave Jansen. He didn't say, I'm Ted the Loaf. It was like he was a Dave Jansen fan who was wondering why this website was so, which purported to be for Ronaldo and the Loaf, seemed to be so Ronaldo-centric.
I just contacted the guy and said, do you want a different take on this?
And then he emailed me again, and I was just like, this is really weird, and I just forwarded it to Brian and said, do you know who this is? You know, this, I have a feeling you know this person.
I found it very interesting because it's a perspective of Ronaldo and Loaf music that never occurred to me.
I think at the time when I wrote that, I was feeling somewhat negative towards the music. I think that was just part of the process of writing it, was kind of, maybe cathartic is a good word after all. But it got Brian and I talking again. I mean, that was the important outcome of it.
I emailed Dave tentatively and got a very warm response, which made me exceedingly happy. And then we just started an email correspondence.
Coincidentally, around that time, I'd arranged to come to Portsmouth. I was staying with another friend. And I just said to Brian, I said, well, actually, I'm in Portsmouth in a couple of weeks. Do you fancy meeting up?
We met up for a drink at the Tangier pub where we'd actually done some of our lyric writing.
Well, it would be 20 years, wouldn't it, for 86, well, it wasn't 80, maybe 87 to 2006, 19, 20 years.
I've got to admit, I was a bit nervous, but literally within seconds that disappeared.
The extraordinary thing about our meeting up again,
it's just like the intervening period never happened, and we were chatting away and reminiscing and this, that and the other.
It seemed like we picked up the conversation as if we hadn't seen each other for a week. Basically, everything just sort of slotted back into place again. The sampled Gregorian chant, wasn't it?
Yeah. Our friendship was rekindled, I would say, almost instantaneously.
We were both older, wiser now, hopefully, than we were, and we were both big enough to, pick things up without any difficulty.
I had a whole wodge of CDRs to give Dave of our music. That's both the actual albums and outtakes.
I mean, I had not listened to this stuff for 20 years, really.
He said the memory I had got so clouded, perhaps by time, that he was pleasantly surprised that actually our music was, he quite liked it. He then started messing around using a computer to play with them, which I thought was wonderful.
A friend of mine had given me some music software programs. He'd heard that I was kind of vaguely interested in trying something like that out.
Dave went nuts. I mean, he was recording stuff all the time, making these the darkening scale projects.
I'd started working on what became known as the darkening scale, which is kind of my side project.
We didn't actually make a conscious decision to sort of like start recording together again. But I think it's fair to say that some of the sort of like ideas and sketches that Dave was coming up with had fired me up.
And I was finding that sometimes I was coming up with bits that I thought, well, I like that, but it's not really in the style of the darkening scale. I started wondering whether it would, maybe it could be a Ronaldo and the Loaf piece.
I've got to say, I had to get my confidence back a bit. Because I hadn't recorded with anyone for so long, I had to sort of like get my confidence back about this is what I can do. I would use my programs to send some, computer audio over to him. It's almost like a replay of when we started again in '77, just with abstract sound, and those abstract sounds became songs. These experiments then became songs.
When we met again, Brian was talking about reissuing the albums on CD.
I've always said that I wouldn't limit myself, and that whatever I like, I was happy to release. From a very early stage, I saw that they were somehow in contact again. I said, well, how about reissuing the old material?
And we said, why not?
When they announced that they're gonna start a reissue campaign, but with all this extra bonus stuff, I was like through the roof. I was so excited.
So we've done the whole catalogue by now.
When Clan Gallery started reissuing these wonderful double CDs, I got a real insight into the making of the music, the preparation for the music.
Obviously, there was a full unreleased album, and as they both agreed that it was worth releasing, it just happened.
Pretty much everything that we would possibly want to release has now been revealed.
I thought maybe once they did all the re-releases, they would do a new album, and I was very hopeful for that.
We'd recorded a few songs. When Brian was visiting me one time, he said, well, look, actually, we've got about nearly 30 minutes worth of music. What do you say that we, go for it and make another album?
We played some stuff to Walter at Clan Gallery.
We had no idea whether anybody would like it or not. I mean, we felt they were strong pieces.
If I tried to describe how Ronaldo and the Loaf album should sound, like for 35, 40 years on, this would have been it. I mean, it's so Ronaldo. Of course, the technology is different and you can hear it. In some way, it's also like they picked up where they just stopped.
Eventually compiled it up, and Gertie Herding happened.
In the sunshine, Me Gertie's blind in the sunshine.
Which was a complete surprise to everybody. It was a surprise to us about 6 months before it actually was released because we hadn't actually brought it together before.
See the grass, oh see the grass. It is greener, greener it is growing to the sweeter melody. Now we dance with the Gerties. Now we sing with the Gerties.
When we made The Elbow is Taboo, we were already exploring the idea of medieval music.
That's right.
Something that fascinated both of us. But we didn't have the resources to do it. Sampling was still in its infancy.
We couldn't learn to play crumb horns that quickly. I was kind of nervous because I didn't know whether they'd be able to recapture what they had. But when Gertie Herding came out, I just felt not only was it as good as everything else, it was actually a step forward.
The new stuff is awesome. I absolutely love it.
My first reaction was, they're back.
I was absolutely over the moon. I thought it was brilliant.
I'm very happy because I'm a fan.
It sounds like Ronaldo and the Loaf. It sounds exactly it's the natural progression.
It's beautiful to me to see that the inspiration seems to be the same and the direction seems to be the same. It's them sitting down again, being pure and going, what do you want to do? Let's do what we want. And they sit down and they do what they want and they go forward. You know, that's inspirational.
My wife didn't like the music at all, but she was always very supportive of everything I did. And I would have loved her to have seen Gertie Herding come to fruition, because I think the music on that, there's some there that she might have actually liked.
Oh, here comes the rain again to put out my fire.
Ronaldo knows, as I see it, a modal way of playing. There aren't many chords in their music. So actually to get something that looks like medieval woodcut or manuscript illumination, that kind of work on the album design worked really well. But I didn't see it coming at all.
I've always hung out on residence chat, and Brian is a residence collector, and he'd come on every once in a while, and I was always too scared to talk to him. That one's my favorite. They're just two regular guys in silly hats. One day I got an email through my contact form on my website from Ronaldo. And I was like, holy crap.
Poxod's interpretation of the world of Gertie Herding, if you like, visually, is spot on.
I was really anxious to see who got the cover because I really wanted the cover. So when I heard it was her, I was really happy and relieved that it was her that got it. I really was.
So I came up with a sketch where they had these basket hats with branches for antlers, kind of, with bells on them. And I made that sketch, and I got to thinking about it, and I was like, I think I can make those hats. And I was thinking maybe they should have some eyewear. And I believe it was David who suggested bread slices for glasses. And it kind of went from there. After I did the album cover, I was so excited to work with them. I decided I would make some merchandise, and they were all up for that. So I made some posters and art cards and stickers. It was just for no reason, because I wanted it. I just wanted some merch, so I made it. It's amazing working with them. They have a lot of ideas, and I try to incorporate all their ideas as much as I can. It's usually kind of a pretty equal three-way collaboration.
Well, we just find our work exciting.
Dave and Brian said, we want to do a video single, if you like. We want to promote it on YouTube. Nobody knew about the album. It was super secret. I'd seen the hats, and I think I'd either seen drawings or photographs of the hats, which Poxod had taken, which tied in with folk and just generally medieval weirdness, really. And in fact, when I show people who don't know Ronaldo and the Loaf's music, and I show them video, and they go, they ask me, what am I looking at? You know, and I have to explain to them what an obios is, and it's apostrophe O-B-B-Y, apostrophe O-double-S. It's a Cornish way or writing of hobby horse, which is somebody who's dressed up like a horse, which is a medieval kind of pantomime thing. Brian is the obios to start off with, but at the end they change round and Dave becomes the obios. It's really how I see them as a duo. It's a biography, really, and a medieval send-up.
They've refused to play live for a very, very long time.
Every year we got an invitation from a guy who runs a festival in Gateshead. Every year he wrote and asked us whether we'd perform, and we always said no.
It's not something we do, that's right. But it was something which I wanted to do at least once in my lifetime, to stand on a stage as Ronaldo and Loaf and do our songs.
Bet you didn't know today. Bet you didn't know today.
And I think Walter had kind of mentioned the idea of doing it.
Of course, I tried to come up with arguments why it would be a nice idea to do it.
I think the fact it was for Walter, because Walter's a good friend and he's been extremely supportive.
I see it as a very, very big honor and a very, very lovely gesture.
Bet you didn't know today. With such a long time coming.
From my point of view, it was when I told friends about it, they said, you've got to do it. And so, yeah, it happened.
Bet you didn't know today.
Well, we went to Vienna last year and I didn't know what to expect.
When they went on stage, it was...
they hated it.
Yeah, I've never been booed before. No, it was amazing.
Very supportive audience. It's fair to say that Brian is more of a performer than I am.
When they performed in Vienna last year, you know, what an amazing venue and feat that was.
I can only compare it when people paid all that money to go and see Led Zeppelin reform in London, and people literally came from around the world. Well, for Ronaldo and the Loaf, people literally came from around the world.
The crowd went absolutely crazy. You know, the crowd really loved them.
The audience were just like so receptive, enthusiastic. That sort of, you know, spurs you on, doesn't it?
Thank you so much for coming.
People weren't just singing along to lyrics, they were... They were actually doing the music in the audience, and you can't hear that so much on the recording, but in the audience, that's what people were doing. They were singing, emoting all of the little pieces of the music. It's like a real intimate knowledge. Fantastic. I was in a hotel room on tour or someplace, and somebody said, oh, you should check this thing out on YouTube, and I lay there in bed and watched Ronaldo and the Loaf live in Austria. So it's just like, oh, this is great. This wasn't like a plush, you know, velvet-seated Vienna piano recital. It was wild, and that made it even more extraordinary, because I know for a fact where they get offered to play in London, and they are very, very nice places. That added to the extraordinary nature of what that show was.
The reissue of all the old material, I think it's given people an opportunity to reappraise Ronaldo and the Loaf. The distance between now and then has given people a different perspective on it.
Listen to what people are listening to now, you know? They're listening to stuff they would never have dreamed they would have liked, different electronic treatments and things like this, and subject matter.
You could feel that Ronaldo and the Loaf, you know, with things that they were doing like 40 years ago that young kids are thinking that they're finding out, but it's been, you know, everything's been done, you know. It's just like Ronaldo and the Loaf are godfathers.
The recognition that Larvae has got as an album in more recent years, I think, you know, it's got some more critical acclaim, if you like, for what it did. I think it was voted was it the 13th or 14th weirdest album in the world?
14th weirdest album of all time.
Of all time, in Mojo, sort of, yay.
They've become, I hate to use the word cult band, but you know what I mean, an interesting internet band. Their popularity has grown in a certain way amongst the cognoscenti.
Well, you know, it's a rare thing for that kind of band to exist anyway, let alone be the kind of band that breaks up and gets back together or whatever. You know, that's a typical band thing, but they're not a typical band and there'll never be another one like them. And you couldn't put a band like that together. A band like that has to come together organically.
They've been rock solid, really, haven't they? Apart from a break.
Yeah.
You know, they've come back together and they're still producing. 8 albums, is it now? 9 albums, something like that. It's crazy.
Well, I mean, the way things work, I think, I mean, what is time? It's just a brief hiatus, really, isn't it? I mean, if you think of it in a bigger, grander scheme, the fact that, you know, it probably was 20 years or something, or the last time I spoke to you was about 40 years ago.
I always feel that things happen the way they happen. They couldn't have happened any other way than the way they happened. The idea that something could have happened differently it's just that, just an idea.
The two guys that came together in 2006, again, were in many respects just the same, but in other respects, very, very different people. We'd grown up, basically.
That 20 years, in some way, was necessary for what happened next.
Our friendship was because of who we were, not what we were, and that's why it's, to my mind, so much richer now than it even was before.
I really enjoy it when Brian comes just for a visit and we just go out. We might go somewhere for a day and explore a town or whatever. Sometimes I think, in a way, it's great that we're not doing music on this visit. You know, we're just having a good time together.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, originally it was like music was the fuel for the friendship, but now friendship is the fuel for the music.
That's a good way of putting that. I like that.
The fact that they were able to overcome a 20-year gap in their creative relationship, well, that just sort of, you know, endears them to me that much more. And it's kind of like, yeah, go for it, Ronaldo and the Loaf.
To come back after that many years is a testament to a friendship, I think. I think that's awesome.
Boil it gently, blessed legume.
As someone I'd never heard their music before, I would say, don't be afraid. Just go with it. Just start listening to it. Don't be put off. Just go with it.
Expect something, a very unique journey, a very unique audio experience.
Put your prejudices aside about music, listen to it with open ears, and try and see the originality in it.
The great thing is, I wouldn't say start here or start there. I'd say dive in and take your chance.
Yeah.
Because whichever album you chose, to me and to most fans, they would be different. So it's like, you know, why... I can't say start. I know where I would start because that's where I started, but take your chance.
Yeah.
Like shake a dice, take your chance.
In the 20th century, they were not that popular. In the 21st century, they might not be popular. But in the 22nd, 23rd century, I think they'll be giants.
So we tend to just wait and see, don't we?
Well, now that we're both dog owners, the possibility of the 40 Minutes of Dog Farts album is
It's certainly there.
Is possible.
It almost sounds like something I would have said.
Definitely.